Hey there, are you ready for a Sunday evening coding session? Well, at least it's Sunday evening in Romania. I'm not sure exactly where you are watching from and what time of the day it might be, but yeah, I guess it's a fairly unusual time for me to actually live stream because usually on Sundays I visit my parents, but this Sunday I kind of skipped it. So yeah, here we are. I just wanted to spend some time on coding this web API from scratch with clean architecture and CQRS. So that's what we try to do here. And we already had two sessions here. This is the third one in this series. So in the first one, we have configured our API to support versioning. And also we have configured Swagger to support versioning, which is very, very important because Swagger doesn't know how to deal with versioning out of the box. So we had to kind of configure it separately. But then we kind of went through the domain model and we have started to actually model our application. And as I said, we won't go the full domain-driven design route. However, some concepts from domain-driven design are, from my point of view, very, very essential, and I tend to use them in most of the applications that I'm writing. And one of those concepts is this idea of aggregate. So right now we just have for starting a post aggregate, and this is kind of like what the post means, what information it has, and of course it has comments, it has interactions, and then we have this user profile. Now the idea for the user profile is that we want to actually use separate, I would say, tables and entities in the end for our identity, so for logging in and things like that, and then user profile, which is, let's say, a user profile for our current application. So that's why in the user profile we will have this string identity ID that will contain the identifier of the user, of the identity user that actually created a certain post, or to which in this case the user profile belongs. Now, why we do that is because it actually allows us to, well, first of all, just create, or when we have user profile, that profile needs to be bound to a certain identity user. So that's very, very important, because this is how we can then later maybe think about authorizations and things similar to that. And then it's also important because I don't know if it will be the case for our API, but there might be scenarios where, for instance, you have just one identity, but you might want to have two different profiles. And the example that I always give in this regard is the Uber app, where you have only one identity, which is the identity that you create, but then you can have a profile as a driver or a profile as a rider. Once again, I'm not sure if we will need this in our application. Maybe if we at some point think about features that will be, I don't know, for business, then maybe we would have two different profiles, like user profile and then a business profile maybe. But having this approach kind of like already gives us the option to just simply do that. Actually have more user profiles that belong to only one identity, which is important. For identity, we will use ASP.NET Core Identity and the built-in functionality that we have there, because it's actually sufficient for what we need, for our needs. And I would say they are sufficient for the needs of most of mid-sized applications that you might probably build. Okay, so that's why we have this identity ID. And the reason why this is string is because, well, in Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, these, or the IDs of the users are a string, which actually is a GUID, but it comes down as a string when we use it, and that's why we kind of use string here. And then we actually went over to this concept of having a rich domain model, and what we have done is, well, a lot of the things that you might usually have in services, we have it already in the domain model. So for instance, we have a factory method that creates user profile, and here is where we can actually make sure that when we create an instance of this entity is in a valid state. And that's the reason why we actually totally encapsulate our domain model. All setters are private, And actually, if we look at posts, more than that, to fully encapsulate this idea of comments and interactions, we actually have backing fields here, and we just expose those as an IEnumerable. And when somebody wants to get them, we just return the backing field for that. And when we want to actually add a comment or an interaction, which we have here, you see, we add actually that comment or that interaction to the backing field. And this is how you fully encapsulate things when you actually want to work with collections. Because if we would make this an iCollection, the problem is users can add to the collection because it's part of the iCollection interface. And that's what we want to avoid. So that's why I always prefer to expose this type of, let's say, collections as IEnumerables, and then fully actually take control about how we actually add or remove items from the backing field. So this is the reason why we actually do that. And theoretically, Entity Framework Core should also support that. But I guess we will see this during today's live session, and we'll then see if we need to actually tweak something. And then we have, once again, the factory method that would actually create an instance of that. And the constructor is private. As again, we want to have full encapsulation of the state of this object in our class itself. So nobody from externally can ever change the state to our object without doing this through our public methods that we actually expose on the object. That's why we have this, for instance, update post text, add a post comment, remove comment, add interaction, remove interaction. Once again, all of this would be in most of the applications part of a service. And here in this case, we have chosen to actually go for a rich domain model and actually not have a service layer at all. And similarly, not having a repository layer at all, because we will use the CQRS approach. We'll use then queries and commons and handlers for them. And then the cool thing about handler is that in each of the handlers, you can then encapsulate all the application logic that you need actually to handle that specific request or command. Now, what we'll do today is, of course, I guess we're at the stage where we will try to actually create a table for that. So we'll actually bring in Entity Framework Core. Now, one thing that I want to check is, did I provide here a connection string? No, I didn't provide a connection string for that. So, okay, I guess we'll have to create that separately. But so as this is always a live coding session, I usually don't prepare for these sessions very much because I want it to be a real coding experience. So I might hit roadblocks, I might hit challenges that I don't know exactly how to overcome. I might look on Stack Overflow and things similar to that. And here, one of the things is what I would have to do is take care of the database. Now, what I'll do, I probably use the SQL Server Express database that we already have in Visual Studio. But for that, I kind of like need to connect to the database. Let me just check how that would look like. Just 1 second. Yeah, sorry for this small hiccup, but of course, there are some things that I really wouldn't like to show on chat. So let's have a connection string. I'll just build up a connection string that we'll use later. Okay, so it will be, the database will be called CWK Social. I guess that's okay. Cool. Okay, so I have here a connection string right now. Let me if we are already here in this app settings.json file, let's just create these connection strings. And first, let's call it default, and let's put in the connection string. Okay, but I guess it should be like that. Okay, trusted. Yes, sorry for that. The copy paste didn't work very good because We have also a lot of escape sequences that were kind of like overridden. So let's do it again, and it should be like that. So now it should be fine. So now we should have a connection string for that. Cool. Okay. Now, so we have a connection string in the app settings.json file. Now for the data access layer, where we will have our DB context and other database related stuff like configurations, we have a dedicated project, which is this CWK social DAL, so data access layer. And here I will create directly a DB context class. But of course, we should start by installing some packages. Okay, so let's manage nuget packages on this one. Guys, whenever you have questions or just want to say something, jump in. Maybe I do something wrong, or maybe you have ideas on how to perform different things better than my suggestions. Then just please feel free to use the chat for that. I would be more than happy to really get the discussion going here. So don't be shy and use the chat. That's actually, from my point of view, why these live coding sessions might be useful, I guess, is that it gives you actually the possibility to interact in almost real time, I would say. Not only with the presenter, but with virtually everybody that's watching, and that would be even greater from my point of view. Okay, so let's think about what we need here. So we are in the data access layer, and we will of course need a few packages here. Now the first one is of course Microsoft Entity Framework Core, but let's change to nuget here, and yeah, let's start to search for that. Microsoft. Of course, I also have to type it correctly, but I already have it here in the list. So Microsoft Entity Framework Core. We are full .NET 6, so we will install the latest version for that. Okay, I accept everything in this case. Then what we would like to have is also SQL Server. Let's install that as well. Okay, what happens here? Guess it's still restoring packages. My internet connection seems not to be the best one right now, or Visual Studio, I'm not sure. So let's accept that as well. The errors that you see are from the API project, because we did some changes to our domain model, but we didn't do the changes on the API, so that's why we see these errors. But during today, we will fix them, because we'll work with real data. And then I also like to install, because we might need that, these tools. So let's install that as well. So I accept. And once again, if you're watching this, I would be glad if you could jump in and just let me know where are you watching from which country, and of course what time of the day it is where you are watching. That would be nice. Okay, so we also have this Microsoft Entity Framework Core tools, and that should be okay. Now there is one other package that we will need, because I said we will use Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity for the user part. So what we will do is we'll also need a package for that. And here in this data access layer, we will have then the Microsoft Microsoft.asp.NET Core.identity.entity framework. That should be one. That should be the one. So let's also install that. And you'll see just in a while we actually need that. Because when I usually use Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, one thing that I always actually like to do is in my DB context, actually make it inherit from the identity DB context. And that might make a lot of sense, I guess. So let's go then over to this data access layer, and let's then create here a new class. And to keep it simple, let's call this data context. Of course, this needs to be public because we'll need that in the application layer. We have data context, and as said, we will inherit from identity DB context. Now, identity DB context is the DB context that contains all the DB sets that you actually need. But why doesn't it find that? So we are in the data access layer, and here is, I guess we have installed this. I guess we have installed them in the wrong. Where did we actually install them? I was not careful here. Let's see, packages. No, here we just have installed the versioning parts. Okay. So yeah, let me just find out where did we actually install them. In the application layer. Packages, yes, we have installed them in the application layer. Now, at least Microsoft Entity Framework Core will still need in our application layer, but yeah, let's manage to get packages and remove them because we don't need them here. We need them in the data access layer. So what we'll need here is probably only this Microsoft Entity Framework Core, but then SQL Server and framework tools we surely don't need them, and I'm not sure we need Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, but not Entity Framework Core. So yeah, let's uninstall that. So you see that we just started the session and we already have done something wrong. We have installed packages in the wrong project. So we'll keep this one, but I guess we'll just uninstall this one. Should we need it, well, we'll install it again, but I don't think we'll need that. And the tools, we also won't need that. Okay, now we have uninstalled it. Cool, so let's go back now to the data access layer and install them here. Okay, browse, let me change the feed to nuget. So, Microsoft Entity Framework Core, let's start with the Entity Framework Core part. Version 6, that should be fine, so let's install that. Then what we need from here is also SQL Server. Install that as well. Okay. And probably if we do some type of configurations or override the on configuring, we'll also need the tools for that. So let's install the tools. Cool, and now the last one, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Entity Framework Core. So let's install the latest version, and I guess we should be good to go right now. We have everything in the right project. So now this should, yes, using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Entity Framework Core. And well, in this instance, we have this data context that instead of inheriting directly the Entity Framework Core DB context, it inherits the Identity DB context that it inherits in turn the regular Entity Framework Core DB context. But if we inherit this, it means that we already have access to all the stuff that Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity adds, like tables for identity users, roles, claims, and things similar to that. And that's why when I use Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity in my project, I also like when I create my DB context to inherit directly from identity DB context. Now, usually this will lead us to the fact that we will probably need to configure some stuff, but mostly I guess it's actually what we need. Now, of course, the way that we will work with this DB context is the way we usually do it in ASP.NET Core applications. So we'll have a constructor. The constructor will take in DB context options. So let's add the reference to Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, and we'll just pass it to the base class. And then we'll have the DB sets. Now, as we have modeled our domain, right now we have two aggregates. The way that I actually like to think about it is that for each aggregate, you should have a DB set. And you shouldn't have DB sets for anything other than your aggregates. Now, if you see yourself in a certain scenario where you might say, but I need also a DB set for something that's not an aggregate, so for something that actually belongs to an aggregate, then, well, the setup might be wrong and you might want to actually pre-model your domain model. But there are also, of course, situations where, well, you just have to wait on this, to think this through, because if it makes sense, then, well, you can even violate this principle. But as said, I tend to always think about and try to always have it in a way that I have DB sets only for my aggregates, not for things that are, I don't know, maybe a subtype of an aggregate. For that, I don't want to have a DB set. Those information or this type of information should be changed directly via the aggregate. This is the whole concept of why we have actually a rich domain model, because every change to something that belongs to an aggregate should actually be defined and validated, of course, by the aggregate itself. And that's why we don't want to actually have the ability to insert something into the database without being validated by the aggregate first. So this means for us that we'll have, for now, two DB sets. Public DB set. We'll have a DB set for user profile. Of course, here we'll also need to add a reference to our domain project, and let's call this user profiles. And we'll have a DB set for our posts. So post, and let's call this posts. Here we'll have a different using, because this is in a separate folder. We have one folder for each aggregate, and that should actually do it for now, I guess. And then what we'll also have, we'll surely need that. So I'll just edit protected override void on model creating, and we just need here a model builder. Of course, I have to also type it correctly. So protected override on model creating, and here's where we will apply our configurations mostly. So yeah, we have right now a DB context. So the next step would actually be to add this DB context to our ASP.NET Core Web API. Let me check if everything's okay with the stream. Please let me know if you can hear me and if you can see my screen properly. That would be a nice feedback. Oh, yeah. Okay. Good. Let me go then to the API project. Let's just remove what we don't need here for the usings. And yeah, let's go to our API. Here's our API project. And remember to keep our program.cs class clean. We just have here 10 lines of code and nothing more than that. We have introduced this concept of registers. So I guess we went through this on the first video in the series. The main concept here is that we would have registers for the web application builder, where we will actually just register services like we do here. where we register mostly the MVC services that we need. And we have this Swagger register where we register the Swagger services that we need. And we have then also one register for the web application itself, where we actually register and configure the middleware pipeline. So we prefer to do this here and not in the program.cs file, just to keep it clean. Now, conceptually, this entire work with the database is, I would say, slightly different than everything else that we already have here. So I would create here a new class for that. And if you didn't watch the video, the cool thing is about it is that we have this extension method. And when the application starts up, it actually scans the assembly for all registers, and then it registers the services. So this means that no matter how many such registers we would add to our application, they will automatically be added as services when the application starts up. So we don't even have to care about that anymore, since we do this via this extension method, and this should help us a lot, I guess. So the idea is that what I wanted to do here is I would like to add a new register, because we might add also other services that have to do with the database regarding authentication and authorization later. I would have here a DB register. So this is a register for our database services. And here in these services, I would inherit web application builder register, because we want to execute this on the builder itself, because that's in .NET 6 where we register our services. So we basically just have to use this method. Now, the first thing that we want to have here is var cs from connection string equals, and on the builder, we have this configuration object, and here it's the regular iConfiguration that we have also in previous versions, usually in the startup file in the iConfiguration property. And here we have this get connection string, and I would like to get the default connection string for that. And now, of course, we also need to install packages here. So we are in the API projects, and here let's where is it? Manage NuGet packages. So that one should do it. Why didn't it open it? Once again. Okay, something is weird here. What's the problem with that? Once again, manage to get packages, and nothing happens. Well, that's kind of strange. Very, very strange behavior for that. I'm not sure why this happens in our API. It shouldn't have to do anything with the errors here. Of course, here the problem is that we don't have this thing anymore. Let's just remove that. Let's just return an OK here. And we have, I guess, one occurrence here on the v2 controller, and here we'll just return for now one OK. And let's see, what other errors do we still have? We don't have this this kind of namespace, so let's remove that. Type of our namespace does not exist. Okay, let's remove that as well. We don't really need it anymore. And yeah, let's run a cleanup here, clean solution. Should be fine. Let's maybe even do a rebuild, and then let's try again. So rebuild solution. Cool, everything is okay. Now let's try again. Dependencies. Oh, but I don't want to manage connected services. I just want to manage NuGet packages. But it's still That's strange. Oh, that's totally strange. Let me close up some things here, because it really got crowded here. So I'm really not sure what exactly happens here. Why is this the case? Okay, let's... Okay, and here error occurred. What type of error? That's kind of strange. Did you ever encounter this type of problem? Okay. It's kind of like strange. Can't browse here? Seems my nuget is totally broken up. That's strange. Let's click also save all. I don't know, I guess I'll just restart Visual Studio for that, because I'm not sure what happens here. So yeah, let me just do that, restarting Visual Studio. Okay, let's open the solution. So it's still preparing. Okay, I don't want to give you any feedback right now because I'm fairly angry. Because I really don't understand what happens here. I really never encountered this problem. That the manage NuGet packager window just won't open at all. So it seems that after restarting Visual Studio, everything should be back on track. So what we need here is Microsoft ASP.NET, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So that's one that we need. Accept. Then another that we need is once again the SQL Server project. Sorry, package, of course, in this case. And we'll also accept that. And if we want to configure things when application starts up, maybe later, we might also need, maybe do some seeding. We'll also need the tools. Or run migrations on startup or things similar to that. So let's also install that one. Let's click on accept here and we should be fine, I guess. Okay, so we also have installed this one. Right now, we actually won't care about the identity user right now, but we'll add later probably also Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity to this project. But for now, I guess everything should be fine. Let's just click rebuild so that all packages get restored once again. So we'll make sure that everything should be fine. Okay, so we have 4 succeeded, which means that we have 4 projects, so everything seems to be fine. So now that we have Entity Framework Core here, we can just say here services. We are on the builder. So builder services add DB context. It should be like that, and it's of course generic, so we have to provide our data context. For that, we'll need also a project reference to our data access layer project. So let's click on adding the reference, which should be fine, I guess. And yeah, right now we should have the DB context, which is in our case the data context. And let's then just run a migration, and hopefully everything will work fine. So let's run it here, add migration, and we'll call this well, initial, of course, how else, but our target project should be the data access layer, because there is where I want to have my migrations created. So let's add a migration, and I would expect that there might be some errors due to the fact that we are inheriting the IdentityDB context. And of course, a provider can be configured by overriding the DB context on configuring. Okay, but okay, accept the DB context options. Oh my god, oh my god. How can I even forget that? I was so excited about going to the migration that, of course, when we add the DB context, of course, we need to also specify options. Options. Use SQL Server. Okay, and here we need to provide a connection string for that. Of course, it was throwing an error because we have to do that, of course. Okay, let's give it another try. As I said, I still expect that there might be some errors because we inherit the IdentityDB context, and probably there might be some things that that the DB context doesn't fully understand. And here, for instance, well, the first one, the entity type post comment requires a primary key to be defined. If you intended to use a keyless, okay, let's take a look at the post comment. How does it actually look like? Because we have this comment ID, but since we are using GUIDs probably, and maybe also because of naming, EF Core doesn't know exactly which is the primary key here. So that's where configurations come in Entity Framework Core. So we have to configure this post comment. So let's go over to our data access layer, and here we'll add a new folder. We'll call this configurations, and actually using Entity Framework Core configurations is very, very important. So if you don't use configurations to configure your models, then just do it. It's really important. And why? First of all, because usually what people do is they simply go to the domain and start to actually decorate here properties with different data annotations that might be used by Entity Framework Core to actually, do the configuration. But this is the domain model, and we need the configuration in the data access layer. In the domain model, we shouldn't have any reference, or the domain model shouldn't care at all about how actually the data access layer works, and therefore we shouldn't decorate properties in our domain model with data annotations that are actually used for Entity Framework. So that's, from my point of view, totally wrong. And that's why we have this concept of configuration classes that we can use in Entity Framework. And that's why actually, or that's what we actually will use also. So we have to create a configuration for this post comment. So let's just do that. Let's add a new class for that. And let's post comment config to keep it a little bit shorter. It should be, I guess that it's okay as being internal. That will be only used here in this layer, so it won't be used anywhere else. Now, how do we actually use and apply configurations is we have to implement the entity type configuration interface, which is of course part of ASP.NET of Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and this is a generic one, and we want our post comment. We want to configure our post comment, so let's just add a reference to our domain and then implement interface. So the error says that the post comment requires a primary key to be defined. So it actually doesn't know exactly which is the primary key for this entity. So we have to actually tell that. So a builder has key, and then we'll have here post comment, so PC, post comment, comment ID. That would be the primary key for that. So for now, that's actually the only configuration that we want to add here. But of course, you could imagine that you could have several other type of configurations like lengths, requiring lengths and things similar to that, especially on string. Right now, we won't really care about that because we can add those at a later point. So let's go to our data context, and that's why we have also overridden this, because here we can simply say ModelBuilder.apply configuration. And here we can say that we want new post comment config. If we add the necessary using, everything should be fine right now. So we have this configuration part. So right now, this one should be solved. Now, if we run the migration again, I would expect that we might get a similar error for the post interaction, at least. Yeah, post interaction, in fact. That's, I said, expected. So let's add a new class. Post interaction config. Once again, this needs to inherit identity type configuration. And after we add the necessary using, we have to provide post interaction as a generic type param. So yeah, let's add also this one and implement the interface. It's actually easy. We should do exactly the same thing. So builder.hasKey. Here, this is a post interaction. So PI I will use here in these expressions. But it's interaction ID. So that should be the primary key for that. So of course, we'll just need to add it to the DB context. ModelBuilder.apply configuration. And in this case, it would be a new post interaction config. Okay. Of course, we need to instantiate it. So it would be like that. Cool. So right now we also have a configuration for post interaction. And once again, whenever you have any questions or just want to say something, maybe I'm doing something wrong and you have some better ideas, then just feel free to do that. I'm more than happy to listen to your questions, and of course I will try to also answer them, or to your suggestions. So let's add the migration once again and see what do we have now. Okay, here we have a basic info. So it's the same thing for the basic info. It doesn't know exactly what the primary key for the basic info is. So yeah, let's add the configuration for that. Add new class. Basic info config. Identity type configuration. Would be of basic info, so let's add what we need to add. Okay with that. So let's implement this interface also. Implementing interface, and here we'll do once again builder.hasKey. And the property that should be a key here is this is a basic info, so BI in this description, and we'll use The basic info. That's actually quite interesting, because for the basic info, we actually don't have an ID, because basic info is a one-to-one relationship with the user profile. So you know what we'll do here? Here we'll use the concept of owned entities. Now in this case, the owned entity would be the basic info, and the owner of this basic info would actually be the user profile. So we'll actually do this differently. For now, we just leave here the basic info configuration because maybe we'll need it later. But what we will do here instead is we'll create, sorry, not a new item. We'll create a new class and we'll create a new user profile configuration. So user profile, because we want to configure this as an owned entity. Okay, entity type configuration of user profile. Let's add the necessary usings. Okay, and let's implement the interface. So in this case, we see that builder here owns one. So here's how we configured an owned entity, and here we have user profile, so UP, and it owns a basic info. And theoretically, what Entity Framework Core will do in this kind of setup right now, it would include the basic info in the same table as the user profile, which is fine from my point of view. If I don't really need a separate table for that, then I won't create one. And everything will be then computed by EF Core when you retrieve these records, so you don't have to actually care about anything. But of course, let's also add this to our own model creating. So model builder, apply configuration, and in this apply configuration, new user profile config. This is what we have just created, and that's what we actually want to use. And here we just need a new parenthesis, and that should be fine. Cool. So let's run the migration again. Okay, another error. Now here we have this identity user login of string. Now this is not an entity that we have defined. This comes from the identity DB context. And here, okay, requires a primary key to be defined. So it seems that's exactly the same problem for this identity user login that belongs to the identity DB context. And EF Core doesn't exactly know what the primary key for that should be. Now, we can then also create a configuration for that, of course. That's a little bit weird. And I'm quite sure that in .NET 5 or previous version, that was not the case. When you were using identity DB context, so something might have changed here. How's that user called? Identity user login. User login config. Okay, so let's configure that. Entity type configuration of its identity user login, and it's also generic and it should be of string. Okay, we are cool with that. So let's add the necessary usings. We need Entity Framework Core, and identity user login should be in ASP.NET Core identity. Okay, I guess that should be fine right now. So let's just implement the interface and say here builder dot has key, and in this case we just want to say that identity user login, so IUL dot, and it should be the user ID. I'm not sure, once again, this entity is part of the identity DB context, so it's not something that we own, but I guess this user ID should be the key. Okay, so of course we need to also apply this configuration on the data context. Model builder apply configuration, new identity user login config. That should be fine. So let's run the migration again. I expect if that is the case, we'll have some error on the identity roles or something like that. In fact, identity user roles. So we need to also configure that one. So let's just do that in configurations, add new class, user role config. So entity type configuration of identity user role, and this should be once again a generic one, which is of type string. So let's add the usings that we need, and of course also implement the interface for that. So right now we'll have here builder.hasKey. So it's actually the same that we had previously. So it's identity user role. And role ID should probably be the ID that we are looking for right now. So let's run it again. There might be other stuff on the identity DB context that we might need to configure. Of course, we haven't added this to the configuration. ModelBuilder, configuration, new identity user role config. Right now that should be okay. That I'm not sure, probably there are some other things in the identity DB context that needs to be further configured. Identity user token, so it's exactly the same thing. Once again, these are things that we actually cannot really foresee, as in other versions I'm sure that Entity Framework Core knew how to work with Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, but I'm not sure exactly why that changes. I never had to do these configurations before, to be honest. But yeah, both .NET 6 and Entity Framework Core 6 is some new stuff, so we get to learn along. Cool. So let's then add a new another configuration for that. Identity user token config. Okay. So entity type configuration of identity user token. We need, of course, to also spell it correctly. And this should also be generic. Once again, the string is for the ID, and the IDs in Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity are always GUIDs, but they come in the form of a string. So we are kind of, that's why we have this generic type. If you want, for instance, to configure your identity Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity tables to use other identifiers, for instance, like integers, you can totally do that. But in that case, you simply say that this is an identity user of int or identity user token of int and similar to that. So you can totally do that, but there are reasons why I actually like to have GUIDs as identifiers. Okay, so what should be the primary key for that? So builder.asKey. This is identity user token, IUT, and that should be, we have the name, we have the login provider, have the user ID, and we have the value. So we actually don't have a key here. So this entity doesn't have a key. So in this case, we might just say has no key, and EF Core should then know how to work with a keyless entity. And yeah, of course, we just need to add this to our data context as a configuration. So ModelBuilder.type configuration, new identity user token config. So we needed to write a lot of more configurations for the identity part than we actually needed to write for our own domain model. So let's run it again and see if everything's okay right now. Okay, seems nice. So this time everything went through correctly. So I would just like to take a few moments to take a look here at the migration. So, okay, we have this role claim. This is a table that's coming from ASP.NET Core Identity. And quite frankly, I'm really not really interested right now into how this is done. Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity is, in my opinion, a very mature product. So, well, they know how these things are configured, and well, EF Core does the rest for the tables. For the user logins, that's still coming up from ASP.NET Core Identity, but then we have ours. So we have these user profiles, and here we have the user profile ID, and this is a unique identifier, so that's cool. Then we have this identity ID, which is cool. Then we have this first name, last name, phone, and you know, this comes from the basic info, and this comes actually from having configured the basic info as being an owned entity. And then the date created and last modified, and we just have this primary key. User roles, that also comes from ASP.NET Core Identity, so we don't have to care about that. Users, okay. That also comes from ASP.NET Core Identity, so we also don't have to care about that. User tokens also comes from Identity Posts. That's something that's coming from us. So it's definitely worth taking a new look at that. So we have this user profile ID, which is okay. Text content, created date and last modified. Then we have here a foreign key for the user profile ID on the post. That's okay. That's something that we will need. The only problem is right now, probably when we want to create a post, we'll need also to specify a valid user profile ID, I guess. So yeah, we'll surely have to also look into that. But it's okay that we have this foreign key, and the referential action should be cascade. Now the principal table is user profiles. It means when user profile gets deleted, I guess also the posts for that user profile should be deleted, which maybe we'll think about if this is useful or not, but for now we'll just assume that it's okay. When you create a user, when you delete a user profile, you just also want to delete all the posts. And then we have this post comment table, which is also okay. And this post comment has once again a foreign key to a post ID, which is once again okay. Cool. We have this post interaction, which is similar. So we have this foreign key to the post ID, which is correct. But I guess we pretty much have everything there. So I really can't think about something that's not here. So I guess that should be fine. So let me just then update the database. Update database. Okay, so build succeeded, and hopefully, yep, the database was added. So that's quite cool. Starting now, we have also a working database. Okay, we have all these configurations. We can just close everything up here. This is the data context that we have. Okay, good. So I guess what we will do right now is, well, I guess maybe I'm just quite happy with what we have achieved right now. So I guess we'll just call it a day for today, and we'll keep on probably on Tuesday. We will continue probably on Tuesday or on Wednesday, where we will create our first commons queries and the handlers, and we'll talk probably about contracts. in our APIs and things similar to that. But until then, well, thank you very, very much for watching and being part of this live stream. And take care, and let's catch up then in a couple of days. So bye.